We need to make friends with all of our emotions. That means instead of running away from them in the hope that we can escape them, to actually turn around and embrace them. The miracle already exists. It's not a question of whether there are miracles happening or not. It's a question of how we notice and what we notice. And if I don't notice something, it didn't happen. In my perception, it never occurred. The measure of emotional intelligence is the ability to take a breath when you don't want to.
How did you get to the point where you're doing what you're doing right now?
Okay, I'm Anthony Abbagnano. I'm half English, half Italian. Discovered the power of breath when I was 8 years old, and it took me another kind of 40 years afterwards to show up for it. But I've discovered that it changes everything. It changes my nervous system, changes my sense of agency in the world, and I spend my life now helping other people do the same thing.
How does an 8-year-old find more about breath?
I was at boarding school in England, and I had a kid came up to me and he put a paper bag in front of my face and he told me to take 20 breaths. And so I did. And then he very gently put me down on the ground and I saw heaven. I saw stars. I like my whole worldview shifted immediately. And it taught me that no matter how much of a struggle life might appear to be, there's actually a much, much bigger perspective. So I think that what the breath does generally, and the way I help people use it, is to really kind of climb up a bit and look down on myself and my own life and the issues, the challenges that I face, and to use the breath as my best friend.
And Anthony, I wanted to ask, so much of, our young selves, we sort of breathe with the diaphragm when we're babies. When do we tend to lose our breath?
Trauma is the first reason we would lose our breath. Anytime, in fact, if you had an emotional gauge, the higher the gauge goes, the higher the needle goes, the less likely we are to be breathing with a sense of consciousness. I mean, there are three levels of breath. There's the breath that we use all the time and that we don't even notice. There's then giving our consciousness to breath, and there's a quantum leap of possibility when we do that. And then there's what's called the conscious connected breath. I know that you guys have worked with holotropic breath before, is that right? Which is a conscious connected breath. And it kind of stacks the effect of being consciously breathing. When you connect each breath, the bottom of the exhale with the next inhale and vice versa, at the top of the inhale with the next exhale, something quite extraordinary happens. I mean, it's actually extraordinary just giving your attention to it, something extraordinary happens. In quantum physics, we've been shown that being present with electron flow can change the way electrons flow. And I think that's a great example to use with breath as well. Just becoming aware of my breath is really half the work. If I can become aware of my breath when I'm under stress or under duress, then I'm moving back into a sense of agency again, that I'm more in control of myself, enabled to respond rather than react, and to become more causative or more playful with life, if you will. It's not like, a lot of us want to control life in order to feel safe, right? It's not that I'm talking about. It's about how we meet life and how we can dance with it and how we can build strength and resilience and robustness in order to be able to bounce back, pick ourselves back up again, and to meet those mountains we need to climb sometimes.
And I wanted to ask, sort of, how often does trauma come up for those that are working with the breath?
Well, I don't think breath brings up trauma. I mean, it shouldn't. It can do if it's not facilitated well. So you are entering into another realm. The difference from plant medicines or psychotropics or psychedelics is that you are controlling your own breath. So you do have a handle on the gauge. It's not like drinking the tea or popping the pill and then going, okay, take me where you want to take me. It's really a willful exchange with the power of the breath. And we keep repeating that statement of, I'm willing to be here, every time we consciously choose to use the breath. And I'm speaking more about a conscious connected breath now, like in a holotropic breath work. So it requires participation. And I think, to your question about when did we first lose it, I like to see the act of taking a conscious breath as repairing one of those moments in my life that I actually lost my breath because of some external force or external stimulus that took it away. And those are mostly bad things, right? Like if I was abused, or if I was wounded, or if I saw something awful, or, we now know with trauma, some people have trauma reactions just because they're told about someone else's trauma. Our ability to be symbiotic with especially people's problems, and especially if we're empaths, is something that we actually need to constructively disengage from. Otherwise, we get overwhelmed by the outer world. So this practice of breathing consciously is, to me, the pivotal opportunity of moving from that moment of trauma where I have no choice. My choices are limited to the three famous reactions of fight, flight, or freeze, to actually creating choice. And so when I say the power of a conscious breath, it's such an impactful consideration to reflect on all the times that I lost it, and the more times that I can do it consciously, the more of those gaps I can fill again, in a way. So it doesn't bring up the trauma, but it does provide us with quantum possibility to heal from the trauma. You got to be really careful about this subject trauma, because everybody's pitching trauma release and getting rid of trauma, and I'm not a believer in that being possible. I do believe that trauma is my greatest teacher. There was a great podcast I saw with Mo Godat talking about happiness, and he did a test of 12,000 people and offered them to take away their trauma. And over 98.5% said, no, I'll keep it. Why? Because of all the growth it caused, because of all the people they met, because of the strength they developed in order to be able to navigate life afterwards. There was so much gain, but to say that there's gain in trauma is kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing to say, because we if we're still affected by the trauma, that's not how we feel. We feel like we're the victim of the trauma. So the breath is really the pathway that we can use, the best one that I've ever found, and I've tried all of the plant medicines that I know of, all of the psychotropics and psychedelics. It's been the best one for me, other than perhaps MDMA, to be able to create a sense of calm in the middle of the storm.
What that breathwork would look like?
One breath. I have a student who made a great statement that I use frequently now, which is the measure of emotional intelligence is the ability to take a breath when you don't want to. So just let that sink in with a breath. You know what it's like when you start to get activated and you're already thinking of your answer. You're not even listening to what's being said. And that's how we escalate our conversations into arguments and wars and what we see on the world stage today. So that ability to stop and take a breath is giving me a window through which I can then make new choices. What I've done is I've made a choice under pressure, and immediately that enables me to maybe choose another breath or another 10 breaths or whatever is needed. And I think it's a great way to respond to a high tension situation, is to say, hey, I just want to back off now and take a few breaths. Or I don't know if you've noticed in any situation with a few people or many people in, it's always the person who says, hey, why don't we take a few breaths together? that is the hero of the moment, because that's the wisest thing you could possibly do. You're buying time, you're creating space, and that gives the opportunity to watch your reactions and to become a little bit wiser as to whether they're good ones or not. And generally, reacting is not a good thing, right? Because it means that we are reacting. We're investing in doing the same thing again. So responding becomes a much better option if we can create the space and the time to let the adrenaline drop, let the norepinephrine drop, let the cortisol slow down a bit, and come back to our senses.
Are you familiar with Wim Hof method? What are your thoughts on that? I'd be interested to hear.
I love it. I love any kind of breath work, so it's not that it's particularly Wim Hof. It's odd to me that it's branded with his name. It would be like saying there's the Conrad breath and there's the Anthony breath and there's the Rupert breath. Alchemy of Breath, which is the brand that I use, to me is not really a brand. It's more of a belief system than a brand. So it doesn't matter whose name it's got on it. The breath doesn't belong to us. We've always got to give it back. Each one we've got to give it back. It's just a question of how many more we can borrow. So I'm quite humble around this issue, but I love what Wim's done for humanity. He's brought breath awareness to a lot of people, and I think it's particularly useful in crisis. You know, think of quarter-life crisis or midlife crisis. It's so cathartic and so willful, and he's such a powerful being that it helps people awaken from the stupor of depression or the pressures of normal life. So I'm good friends with his daughter, and I love his work.
Thank you. In one of your episodes, you mentioned the difference between conscious, subconscious, and superconscious. Could you share what is the difference between all three of them?
It's interesting because I was reading about triangle theory as well before I came, and it's the same. It's different. It's not about relationships and external world and inner world. It's more about you said it, the subconscious, the conscious, and the superconscious. So here's the deal. If 95% of the choices we make are either made by the subconscious or ruled by the subconscious, that means we've got 5% of conscious choices with which to navigate life. And the rest of the time, and most of the time when we make a conscious choice, the subconscious will overrule it, right? Think of all those New Year's resolutions that have been dropped or forsaken. So the subconscious is an archive that is usually full by the time we're 7 or 8 years old, and is a database of systems that were coping systems that were devised at a time that we did react, that we were fearful or traumatized. And to re-access the subconscious is really a difficult thing. There are only 3 or 4 ways that you can do it. Things like impact, an accident could reinform the subconscious, an extreme authority like a kidnapping, the Stockholm Syndrome, or a dictatorial government like what's been happening in the Middle East recently. Things like that can reinform the subconscious. And these are usually the negative ways it could be reinformed. There are other ways too, and repetition is one. And in hypnotherapy, we use repetition a lot. Those of you who are hypnotherapists know that. It's perfectly okay to keep using the same word. It really helps widen the access route to the subconscious. Breathing is repetitive. Consciously and constantly choosing to come back to it. And when we do that, when we use our conscious mind to repeat a breathing practice, we soften the walls of the subconscious. We also bring in the superconscious, and I believe this to be true. It's an assertion. For me, it's a fact, but it's also referred to in every religious document as a supernatural force, the breath. that breath on I think it was Muhammad's mother's chest, from which Muhammad was born. It's referred to in many different documents as a supernatural power. Let's call it the superconscious, if you will, the highest part of human awareness and beyond. So if we have those three in the same space, and I kind of see it as an alignment. If I'm here consciously breathing, especially a connected breath, and I'm accessing my subconscious and I'm opening my awareness to that which is most subtle, then in that moment of alignment, something happens. And it's not contributed to by our wish or our desire or our expectation. In fact, all of those things push it away. It's really about presence. It's a quality of presence that we give, and we give attention to something without needing it to change. And those are some of the precursors of what we might refer to as miracles, is that if we can create that alignment, which might be one moment in a breathwork session, or it might be a few minutes in a breathwork session, there's a whole reset that's going on. The subconscious is not just getting reinformed by my conscious will, but it's also getting reinformed by a power that's greater than I am. And so it comes down to a possibility here, which is if we are willing to believe that there's a power that's greater than we are, then we can arrange it so that power helps us. And correspondingly, if you don't believe in a higher power, how can it help you? So there's a kind of fearless, easy access route to finding out, which is just to try it.
When sort of connecting that conscious and subconscious mind, is your sort of heart and brain sort of having a coherence there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm in New York this week, and I'm about to go meet some young people who are developing earbuds that will actually do an EKG. And so I'm going to be going on their machine because they have a full EKG system there, and we're going to do some breath tests with them to see what happens. But generally, what we see is it's not just nervous system regulation. It's also right-left brain balance, perceptive change. There's been a study done concluded in the last 10 or 12 weeks at Sussex University about altered states of consciousness and breathwork. And now the scientists are kind of catching up with what in the breathwork world we've known for some time, where it gives us a different perspective. I liken it to discovering that, my whole life I've been looking at one side of the coin, and now I get a chance to go around the other side and have a look. And it's always about amplitude. It's always about a larger perspective. It's always about, therefore, whatever I think has been troubling me is actually not as big a deal as I thought it was. So it's helpful. And a lot of my work, especially because I'm an elder in this space right now, a lot of my work is done with the hope that we actually don't need these midlife crises or quarter-life crises. And by prearranging ourselves and by doing the work preventatively, that we can meet those moments with a sense of calm and wisdom and irony and all of those things that they really help. They help us. The human condition is a bit messy, right? And the people I deal with are usually like under the illusion that everything is kind of being constructed to destroy me. I'm feeling like I'm a victim. I can't find a way out of this. And I know that I don't want to be. I know that it's not helping me to be in this dark place. I know the depression is no good, but I can't even brush my teeth, let alone, you know, create change. So I think it doesn't matter whether someone is in the crisis or before they reach it. There are things we can do and things we can understand that really create a perspective of more balance and therefore more ability to meet the challenge when it comes. There are some really very simple principles of life that I've learned only because I ignored them long enough, so they had to hit me over the head. For example, even in the most challenging moments, there's always something else waiting to happen, right? But we don't feel that. When we're in that moment of defeat, there's no possibility of being aware. You know, intellectually we might be able to, but intelligently we can't. We're just not ready for it. So some of our work is about, well, how can I learn to be in the discomfort of not knowing? What does it look like to consciously create moments or take life's moments and let them nudge me into a state of not knowing? Because that's actually the place where the most possibility exists. You know, we go through life feeling shame about being confused, but confusion is actually the greatest data exchange center that we could ever enter. There's so much going on in our confusion. If we don't react to it and go into a spin and we become more the detective of our experience, there's something in there. There's a golden key at the bottom of every muddy pond. And if we don't pay attention to it, we won't find it. We might scramble out the edge with a coping system and get out of the mess, but it will keep coming unless we've mastered it. So that journey to mastery becomes really important. And I see people in mastery at 21 or 23 years old. And I see people at 80 years old that study with me that have not yet found it. They haven't found that sense of security. That's part of who we are, right?
So, touching on that confusion when you are in that moment and what I should focus on when I'm meditating, let's just say I focus on my breath. Should I expect the fix to come up, or is there any particular rules that I should focus on when meditating to get out of that confusion?
Well, I think the need to get out of the confusion is perhaps the greatest enemy in that moment. And the will to stay in the confusion consciously is the greatest act of will that you could make. So, and again, this is better preventatively than in the moment. It's always better to have a practice in place so you have the robustness to be able to greet the situation. You know, if you go to the gym and you work out, then it gets easier to lift things. And it's no different with the psyche. It's the same thing. So the more exercise that I do, the more prepared I'll be when I have to make the lift. But what is it that's going on? First of all, there's a recognition that there is confusion. And then there are feelings that come up, usually something about shame or insecurity or fear or a negative emotion. We need to make friends with all of our emotions. And that means instead of running away from them in the hope that we can escape them, to actually turn around and embrace them. You can do that with the power of the breath. It's actually possible to do that. So if someone's in fear and I'm guiding them, I would say, okay, let's feel 10% of the fear. I just want you just to feel 10% of it, something manageable. It doesn't need to be traumatic. And as you do that, take some breaths. Consciously breathe as you feel. And you're beginning the process of alchemy already. Just the ability to feel a tiny part of that massive potential But to breathe with it is already creating a different relationship with it. You're no longer trying to run away from it. You're sitting in this moment with it, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to monitor it. And as you consciously give priority to the breath, you're also pushing yourself into the witness rather than the sufferer. So you are now able to witness this feeling and breathe at the same time. Do that for a couple of minutes, and I say, well, where is it in your body? Where does this feeling of fear live in your body? And once you've identified where it is in your body, then your meditation would be to focus on that place in your body. Imagine that your attention is connected to that location in your body by an elastic band, by a rubber band. So every time you wander, you come back. Every time you wander, you come back. And wandering is fine when you're meditating. That's not an issue. It's the power to come back that counts. All you need to do is remember one more time than you forgot. So then you're strengthening. Then you're lifting the weights. So with alchemy meditation, that's exactly what we do. We don't wait for the fear. We just have whatever experiences that we're having in the moment, we look for where it lives in the body. So my whole relationship with you guys right now is being informed by this kind of like slightly moving feeling in my belly, in the chubbiest part around my navel. There's this kind of like gentle disturbance. Like I'm excited, I'm meeting new people, I might be asked a question that's challenging, and I love these situations. But there's also the inner child in there that's like, oh God, I don't know if I really want to be seen that much. I think I might want to hide. All these human experiences that we have, right? When I start to give attention to my belly instead of the stories that I tell myself, then that's where the alchemy really continues. It then moves into a whole different stage. And this body meditation, this embodiment meditation, using the breath is what I guide people to do when they're in a breathwork as well. So if you do it preventatively, that's how you meet the world. And guess what? Everything changes. If you say something and I'm going to receive it, not just with this monkey mind that's running fast and not really listening anyway, I'm not just going to listen to it with this, but I'm also going to really feel in my body what's going on when you speak. You will realize that. You will sense it energetically. I also might say, wow, what you said is so significant. I can feel how my belly's changing when I hear you. And to you, that means that I'm really listening. That changes the quality of our conversation immediately. And this is in relationship with people, but it's also in relationship to life itself. It's not just in relationship with people. It's in relationship to what's happening with politics or what's happening at the train station or in the cashier queue or whatever it might be. Whatever those external stimuli are can be taken in whatever dose we want, from homeopathic to super allopathic, and we can bring that outer world then into the realms of our own laboratory, I like to call it, our own understanding, where we can work with test tubes and Bunsen burners or whatever it is. We can work with it in our own inner being and understand it more completely. And all of that is the same as going to the gym. It's a practice that we can use 24/7 that is strengthening our quality of presence with any situation. So I'm thinking right now about this finger touching this finger. What's the feeling on my skin, and giving it attention. I'm feeling the weight of my car keys in my pocket, or the discomfort of my telephone, or the fabric against my skin, or we begin to notice in a different way. And this noticing, once we polish the lens of our noticing, allows us, when the crisis does come, to know how to meet it. So it doesn't upend us anymore. so we can actually pre the event of the crisis by going to our psychic gym and doing our work beforehand. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, does it have a different meaning behind where you feel the emotion in your body?
Does it have a different meaning? Well, yeah, I think it does generally. There's heartfelt, gutfelt, peripheral, skin feelings. They all would have different meanings for different people. I think the generalizations are when I ask people to feel sadness, they would put their hand on their heart. When I ask people to check in with their fear, they go down to their belly. When I ask people to go through processes that I create to help them, I find that the lower down in the body, the closer to the root chakra or the perineum that the feeling is, the more radical the work is. So some people would say stuff is going on in the throat, but that's, for example, associated with the lack of voice that we learn to live with, the collection of all those no's that we didn't feel comfortable to share. Reminds me of a little story. When my grandson now is 23 years old, and when he was a baby, he was in his twos, I think, and he was a rambunctious little fellow and would walk around and pull out plugs from sockets and do everything that 2-year-olds do. And I was staying with my son, who was in San Diego at the time, and Timothy was into saying no. And he would say no to whatever invitation or command was given to him. It's time for dinner. No. Finish your thing. No. It's time for bed. No. And he'd just go, no, no. And then he'd walk around just going, no, 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 for no reason at all. And I said to Damien, my son, I said, look, I know it's your job, this, but don't you want to tell him to stop saying no? And Damien said, no, I want him to keep his no. I want him to be able to say no. And as a 23-year-old, he has the maturity of a 50-year-old, this kid. It's like he looks at people and he's got his inner register and he's going, no, this ain't it. This isn't, no, this isn't, no. And he'll say so too. And to be around someone like that, who's that straightforward and that clear, might seem a little frightening, but actually it's an invitation to intimacy, because we're not dancing around the outskirts or the personas we've invented to cope with life. We're really given access to something more profound and more vulnerable and more real.
Beautiful.
It's a really lovely story. Sorry, I just wanted to add, because it's very rare you find individuals that want to be sort of clear and to the point, and I think breathwork really offers that. Just going back to the feeling of different parts of the body, I recently did a discovery course with breathwork, and we were doing sort of inhales in through the mouth and then very short exhales through the mouth, almost like you're blowing on your glasses to wipe them, kind of thing. And my diaphragm got so sort of, you could really feel it, all the oxygen in the diaphragm, and my thighs, because I was in child's pose in the position, all started twitching, and I couldn't help but sort of just burst into tears from that feeling. And it was just a very big emotional release. And my also question to that is, what do people often misunderstand about healing, especially like trauma through the breath, with things like that?
That's a beautiful question, Rupert. I think in a nutshell, people think it's a process, not a practice. So people feel like it has a beginning and an end. and they expect that. And I think that's the antithesis of what it is. That's the illusion. It's like, how many layers to the onion are there? We keep peeling them off and getting more and more true to ourselves. And does that ever actually stop? So I would say that's the biggest misunderstanding, is that people are not, that healing is actually a state of being. It's not a process. There's no measure of beginning or end, or a list that we can check off. It, in my experience, doesn't work that way. Same with trauma. I mean, like what you were expressing just now about when your legs started trembling, that is seen as trauma release, and there are trauma release exercises that have been designed to help people release trauma, because we know that trauma lodges in the body. We know that. And that, I think that's connected to that loss of breath, is that moment of freeze is when the embodiment of the trauma occurs. And so the physical release is valid, although we also know that each time that trauma or the memory of that trauma is awakened, all of those hormones flow, they all erupt and surge through the system, so that the cortisol and the epinephrine and the adrenaline are back in flow again. And so the trauma is like reinstated. It then comes back again. So to me, trauma release, that's why I think part of the reason I think that trauma releases would be nice, but I accept trauma as my teacher, not something I have to run away from. And therefore, I think it's better not to seek release, but to seek relationship, because the closer I can create, the more relationship that I can create, the more it instructs me and gives me even a heads up, a forewarning of something. It gives me an opportunity to learn new ways to meet challenges, and it strengthens me. So to me, the work of trauma is in the body, and it's also in the mind. It's a combination of the two. And trauma is like such a vast subject. It's not a battlefield. Yeah. It's a galaxy. It's all the galaxies. It's like so many different ways that we can be traumatized, so much that we've inherited ancestrally, culturally. The pain body that Eckhart Tolle talks about, there's just, there were the never-ending qualities of trauma, and we're not going to get away from them all. Not going to happen.
Thank you.
Just going back a bit to what you spoke about, being available to miracles.
Yeah.
Related to superconscious, aware. How do we do that? How we become more available to miracles?
Well, I think you just said it right there. We become available. I think that's a really, really succinct way of saying it. First of all, what is a miracle? If you go look in the dictionary what a miracle is, it talks in terms of an unexpected event, a random event that might happen. I became curious about this. I was living in the East. I was living in Asia at the time, doing a lot of meditation, alchemy meditations. I was deepening and developing breathwork, and I understood that the miracle already exists. It's not a question of whether there are miracles happening or not. It's a question of how we notice and what we notice. And if I don't notice something, it didn't happen. In my perception, it never occurred. So I've got a window out here looking down on 8th Avenue, and I don't know how many fire engines there are driving past right now. There might be one or it might be six. I have no idea. If someone said that there were 20, I would say, no, there weren't. I can only hear one. So what I don't notice doesn't happen. If the red car is going outside your window right now, and I told you there's a red car going outside your window, you'd say, not for me, there isn't. So there's something about the power of our noticing that is pivotal. And I think we can all accept that our bandwidth to register things is more than overwhelmed today. The chaos in the outer world is so large, and the communication systems we've got are so much more well dispersed that it's just overload all the time. The adrenaline that I spoke of before, on a scale of 1 to 10, we've now learned to live somewhere around 7. 200 years ago, 300 years ago, people were living at 1, 1.5. And when we needed the adrenaline, we had it. We could lift a horse and cart, or lift the cart to get it off our child, or stop the train, or whatever these ridiculous, almost superhuman capabilities might have been. We were able to do it because we had a resource of adrenaline, which is a finite resource. And that's why we suffer today from adrenal fatigue. It's because we do run out. But as the world would have it that every commercial, every exchange, every thing is demanding our attention. So the quality of our attention is used up by all of this external stuff. Now, we have this reticular activating system, which is something the size of a little finger in our brain. And we've been endowed with this amazing possibility to define, to filter some of this in-feed so as to make it manageable for the brain to be able to cope with it. And the RAS, the reticular activating system, the RAS is a useful filter. And the way it shows up in your life is, if you were going to go, say you were hankering after a pink Honda motorcycle, you would all of a sudden start noticing all the pink Honda motorcycles that are out there in the world. And you might never have noticed them before, but all of a sudden now you will. And that's how the reticular activation system works. And it's something that we can actually manage. We have the ability to, by the quality of attention that we pay, to create a filter that's directed towards the input that we wish to receive. Okay? So we're not entirely abdicated from this process of miracles, as the dictionary would suggest. There are ways that we can actually participate. I almost want to say belong. In fact, I will. There are ways we can belong to this state of awareness that allows us to benefit from them. The most obvious one that I can think of is that each one of us sitting here already is a miracle, with something like a 35 trillion to 1 chance that we would even be born, with all the sperm that went into handkerchiefs and wrong time of the month, and the egg that wasn't ready, and all of those times that conception did not occur. A 35 trillion to 1 chance already makes us a miracle. And yet we walk around with a sense of burden and shame and not being good enough and being unlovable and not belonging that bedraggles us. And how often do we get up in the morning and look at ourselves and go, you are amazing. You are, not only did you beat 34,999,000,000 blah, 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 00 other sperm to get there, you are in front of this mirror right now looking at yourself, and you are aware of what a miracle you are. I mean, that's a miracle. So these things, like I said, they're happening all the time. We just don't pay attention to them. Then we look at what does attention mean? what does the word attention mean? We pay attention, we give attention. What does it actually mean? It comes from the Latin attendere, or the Italian attendere, which means to wait. And so, how do I wait? What does waiting look like? Well, I've discovered over the last 30 years of practice that waiting excludes conditions. Any conditions that I include in my waiting will inform or contaminate the possibility for what I'm waiting for. So what I teach is, and what we do in our breath work, is we give all our attention, for example, to a body sensation. But we don't expect anything. We don't interpret. We don't need. We can have intention, but it stops there. And we even let go of the intention when we are in the breath state. All we're doing is continually breathing into presence. And that's my 100% effort that I can create in this situation. Whatever I'm meeting outside, whether it's relationship or world or whatever it might be, I can only get halfway there, and that's my 100%. Then something else will unfold. But if I don't notice what's unfolding, it didn't happen. So, and that's the way we go through life. We go through life not noticing where the miracles are. So if we really just focus on the lens that we look through, we'll find that the miracles can occur. And I think you see this happening with, or the miracles that are occurring can be noticed. And I think you find this with Abraham Hicks. If any of you have been to see Esther Hicks speak, or we saw it in The Secret 25 years ago, the power of manifestation, and all of these things which actually work are because we are understanding that the mind we use, although it wants to get all the credit for everything that happens, is really quite a limited instrument. And it doesn't allow us, doesn't permit us to see what is actually happening. And once we accept that, then we can fool the mind and get beyond what the mind's limits are. And this is a tricky business. It's like, how can you expand your consciousness when you're thinking within the consciousness you have? And that's why people do turn to external possibilities like pills and drugs and plant medicines and so on, because they're a way to get downloads that we've kind of like dumbed ourselves down. We've dulled our awareness to the point that we need something exceptional to make us wake up. And that's what the breath does. So, after all of my exploration, the breath is the best tool to discover what I don't know.
Why do you choose after you?
Sorry, I was going to say, I feel like it really relates to that, because I feel like so much of what we focus our attention on is constantly risk assessing problems in our lives, which again feeds the loop of you're not really in belief that this is a miracle, but that life is just a endless sort of suffering and problem sort of assessment. My question is for sort of, because I sort of feel that a lot of the human state tends to be you're constantly looking out for the dangers around the world, sort of that you interact with. That might be sort of people, situations, and I definitely do that. I can catastrophize at times, and find myself that I'm sort of always looking at problems, which again I feel bring more problems. For people that like that, how can you sort of practice that sort of immediate gratitude?
Well, two things. I think there's another super point. And you brought in the word gratitude, which is huge. When we catastrophize, when we go down the tunnel or slide down the tube or whatever, the funnel, whatever you want to call it, into the darkness, are is contrary to what we want, right? We can't, and it becomes a slide that we can't stop. There's something very powerful about the momentum of that happening. And what we need to do in simple terms is to develop the skill of noticing in that situation. And for me, again, the greatest tool to put me into the witness is to use my breath consciously. So if I'm going to catastrophize, my inclination is to do it with will, not by accident. I'm going to decide to do this because I want to explore it, but I'm going to use my breath. I'm going to take my breath with me so I have a track. It's like laying down the talcum powder on your journey so you can find your way back, carrying a string down when you go spelunking or whatever it is so you can get back out again. I'm going to take some insurance with me, and that is my breath, because I know if I give my commitment to my breath, I move into being the witness of the feeling rather than being dominated by it. Now, having said that, then there are some other things that really help, and gratitude is one of them. But before I get to that, we know that if you walk into, I think this is a great analogy, if you walk into a dark room, which is pitch black, it takes about 36 minutes for your eyes to be able to distinguish form and distance. So you get an idea of where the walls are, or if it's 99% dark and there's some kind of darker shadow or lighter something, you get to detect it. It's inevitable that the longer we stay, and I'm using that as an analogy because it's inevitable that the longer that we stay in that state consciously, willfully, the more that we will discover. But there's a willfulness to it. So we're either going to be the victim of it, or we're going to and be wallowing, which is, one could conclude, to be self-indulgent, weak-wristed. There's no decisiveness in there, and we're in a victim position. If we become the detective of our own experience or the student of our own experience, then everything changes. It's like, as I'm going into the slide, I'm going, okay, well, that could be a foothold. Oh, okay, yeah, I might want to remember that when I get down the bottom. And those all become assets. They become assets that we can use to build our choice back again, because we're making the choice in the first place. We're regaining the choice. Even when the slide is happening, we're regaining. I'm going to take my choice with me. I'm going to take my choice to breathe with me. So I will never be disconnected from my choice, because no matter what happens, I can choose to breathe until I can't, until that's gone. So become the detective of your experience. And to make that easier with the tough calls, with those tougher moments, get used to it when it's not tough. So sit down, feel the grief, feel the sadness, feel one of the darker or the sadder or the more grave emotions, and breathe into it and explore it. What do you notice about it? Where is it in your body? Does it move when you give your body the attention? Does it become overwhelming? Can you breathe out of the overwhelm? Can you breathe a slower breath and see what happens? Breathe a faster breath and see what happens. Start to explore this incredible tool we've been given that we've never really used appropriately, and use that as your way to navigate the darker realms. Now, gratitude, isn't it curious how we give gratitude after the event? We always give gratitude in retrospect. We never give gratitude in advance. And I think giving gratitude in advance is one of the best ways to polish the lens, because we're really lifting our eyes up. I remember in NLP, I studied NLP back in 1973 or something when it first came out in Oregon. And they say, if you look down at the ground, that's what you'll see. If you look at the sky, that's what you'll see. So let us raise our sights preemptively and preventatively and as an investment in harmonizing with the vibration and all the other things that happen with the vibration of gratitude and all of the other things that occur in that same vibrationary realm, right? So gratitude as a practice is one thing. Being grateful for the things that haven't happened yet is another whole level. And that's really where the secret came in and made its mark, because a lot of manifestation is really inhabiting the feelings you would have when what you want to manifest has already occurred. You're actually inhabiting the emotions and the feelings that you would have once what you want to manifest has already occurred. And then you're messing with the clock. You're messing with the human notion of time. You're bypassing this thing altogether, and you're inhabiting what has already happened. And so we can be grateful for that too. Even if it hasn't happened, we can create gratitude for the sensation of being with this incredible partner. It reminds me of... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to ask quickly, do you believe that by having or by doing gratitude practice, and you're sort of, like you say, by being grateful for things that haven't happened yet, but you sort of feel and understand that your body doesn't know the difference between whether or not that reality's happened, and therefore that thing can actually happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because we're using, exactly. Because we're using what was taken away from us as children, which is our imagination. We're creating the image of it, and then it can happen. I mean, isn't it curious when you think of all the books that have been written, like Brave New World and 1984, and all the sci-fi books, and it's all happening.
Yeah.
It's actually happening right now because someone had the imagination and they planted the flagpole in that reality, and then all of a sudden humanity begins to gravitate towards it. Imagine what we could imagine together to be able to create different outcomes.
So for people who trying to manifest the whole life, I feel like that's why I'm a bit confused when it comes to that. So when you're visualizing your best outcome, do you actually attract those miracles, or you simply attract more? Your brain simply picks up more situations and scenarios of what you're already imagining in the physical world, if that makes sense.
Say the last part again.
So you mentioned previously that if you thinking about pink scooter, you're going to start noticing more pink scooters. Is that right? Maybe. Yeah. So if I'm imagining myself doing the outcome that I want to do, my brain will naturally look into these things that could bring me that sort of situation, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not actually a miracle that just drops from the sky. Is actually your brain picking up on these little things.
Yeah, I think we're harmonizing with a vibration that is where those things occur. You've seen the film The Matrix, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a matrix in which humanity exists, which is what I call the mad matrix, right? It's red or blue. We're getting down there. It's red or blue. You're fucked or you're fucked, kind of thing. But there is also a miracle matrix, and it's another whole template. It's another whole map that exists that is waiting for us to levitate or raise our consciousness, or our, whatever term you want to use, is waiting for our attention. It's waiting to be noticed. And exactly what you said, Conrad, it's by the power of your noticing that you're going to gain what has actually already happened. But the mind tells us it hasn't happened, so we can't gain it, so we can't do it, and we listen to that story. But now you're taking a bit more control over this, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to act as if this has happened. And then It has happened. All of a sudden, blip, the check comes in the mail, you get the phone call or whatever it is, it actually happens. But you need to really inhabit it unconditionally, not with a need, not with an expectation, not with a fear, not with a sense of acquisition, not, it's not like, oh, I'm going to imagine I got $1 million because then I can have all the girls on my arm that I want. It's not what it's about. It's about, okay, I've got the $1 million. How does that feel? Or I've got the life relationship that I want. How does it feel? How does it feel? I'm going to meditate on how that feels. And the mind is very reluctant to do this because it's just not possible, right? It's out of our range of possibility. So the mind will seek exits and ways out, and the conscious mind, or the subconscious mind rather, will undermine us. So what we need to do is to say, okay, I'm going to have my clock set on my phone for 15 seconds. I'm going to give myself 15 seconds and I'm really going to focus on this. I'm going to give it all I've got, and then take a break for a minute or two and then go, okay, God, I think I almost got there. I sensed something different. Now I'm going to go back there again. I'm going to do it another 15 seconds. And keep doing that as a practice. Last thing at night, first thing in the morning. And it becomes your new reality. But there, I want to be thorough here because there's something underneath this that needs to be understood. It starts with a question. Why is it that everybody wants what they haven't got when actually they've got exactly what they asked for? Why is it everybody wants what they haven't got when they've actually got exactly what they dialed up? What's going on here? If only this is what I want because then all of these stories we tell ourselves are obfuscating one fundamental truth. And they're abdicating from our ability to be creators in the world. So if we were made in the image of God, which was what I was told when I was a kid, but I'm just using that as a hypothesis, we have creative power. If we have creative power, unless we are willing to take 100% responsibility for what we are creating in our life right now, we don't stand a chance of changing it. We need to be able to understand that we have created the situation we live in. Now, I'm not saying that I got President Trump to argue with Zelensky or whatever. I'm not talking about that level. What I'm talking about is how we walk through life. It's much more practical than that. How we walk through life and the things that we notice and the choices that we make that are 95% obscured because they're in our subconscious are controlling what we do. So when there's a shit show, when things have gone wrong, if I'm going to take 100% responsibility for that happening, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that I'm going to go to the person that wronged me or slapped me or hit me and say, gosh, I want to take responsibility for you hitting me. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what were the string of choices I made in order to be in this situation? And which choice would I change if I had a chance to do this again? It really gets to be quite ABC nuts and bolts. What is the unconscious commitment that I made to create the situation that I'm in? And just find one. I mean, let's face it, it takes probably hundreds of thousands or millions or trillions or whatever, but just to pick one that I could change that would change my circumstance. Put this in a really practical example. My wife fills the sink with dishes. And I love to do the dishes because I love to help. But when the sink's full of dishes, I can't move the tap and I can't so I just lose my will and I go, oh God, I can't be bothered. I'll just, do them later. Or she'll do them, or she'll have to empty the sink before I do the dishes. So I go to her and I say, you're going to have to empty the sink for me. It's just the way I do it. It's just like, you just have to do it. It's who I am. Accept me or don't, all this sort of thing. frustrating. It's a bummer. It weighs heavily on the relationship. If I act as if I'm 100% responsible, what's a choice that I could have made in that journey in order to stop that happening? What kind of choice could I have changed? Maybe it was to sit with her when there are no dishes in the sink and say to her, I noticed how you put a plate beside the sink this morning. I just want to really acknowledge you and thank you, because it made it so much easier, the flow of washing the dishes. And I just love to support you, instead of waiting for her to screw it up and then blaming her. So what are the choices that you're making that you could change that are creating the outcomes that you don't want? And how could they be replaced by choices that actually converge with that outcome?
Choosing encouragement over just beating people down.
Well, in that example, which is not true, by the way, my dear wife doesn't do that. I try to stay away from the real ones. We don't want to talk about them. No, I'm joking. But yeah, in that instance, it was about finding a kind way to communicate. Yeah.
I wanted to touch back onto sort of being able to sort of create your own reality. And I believe the ancient world was really good at doing that. And I find that today's world is really quite overstimulating and it's very digital. And I feel that there's sort of a really big barrier to sort of connect with the breath. And I wanted to ask sort of how can we start to dismantle that barrier to truly connect with ourselves, to become more of a creator?
Yeah. Excuse me. I'll take a drink of water on that one.
Yeah, sure.
So I want to go back to the ABCs about the breath. And I think it sounds simple, but it's a paradox. It means everything. So just take a breath and imagine, as you take a conscious breath, imagine what your first breath would have been like. What was happening when you took your first inhale? What was going on? What was going on in your body? Probably things you don't even know. Things like you're cleaning out the last 40% of the liquid that was in your lungs, because they were full of liquid when you were in the womb. Now the umbilical is cut. You are kick-starting your autonomy. This is the greatest act of agency that you could ever experience in your first breath. Everything is beginning to live without the sustenance that was provided when you were inside your mother. That's huge, right? And just imagine the brain. I mean, the curiosity, the openness, the acceptance, the wonder, the immensity of what that first breath could be like. Pretty powerful. Now, fast forward to the last breath. I don't know if you've ever seen someone's last breath. It's a very powerful moment. It's complete exhaustion, like from a car, exhaustion. It's expiry. There's inspiring and there's expiring, and it's expiry. In Latin, inspire, and I think 7 or 8 other languages, means to bring in spirit. And expiry means to let the spirit go. So that could be associated with this last breath, is that the spirit is leaving the body, but also that all of the things we thought were important, everything we gave value to, from the most tender, wonderful, intimate relationship to the credit card bills, to everything, is being exhausted. Our awareness of that is like the big sigh, I call it. 2 huge moments. And we actually repeat those moments. We repeat the breath of birth and we practice the breath of death in each cycle of breath. And we breathe 25,000 cycles of breath a day. And how many do we notice? So that's really where the answer lies for me, Rupert, is that it's in noticing our breath. That's the pivotal moment. When I make the choice to notice my breath in any given situation, that is the beginning of my agency again. And choosing what I want to exhaust and being open to what is going to be granted to me as I breathe in. So that's a little bit, I mean, I wouldn't say woo-woo, but it's a little bit abstract. But if you bring it into real life as an example of what this young man, Julian, said to me as an act of emotional intelligence, when you don't want to breathe, take that breath, choose another 10, choose another 50 if that's what you need, choose a whole breathwork session if that's what you need. Each one of these choices you're making is strengthening your agency. You're reclaiming that agency that you first claimed. It's an echo of your first breath. So once you become aware that that's what you're doing, you will feel differently. Take 10 breaths. My wife and I have a contract. It's part of our marriage contract. And it says that either of us has the right to call upon the other to take 10 breaths together, looking at each other in the eyes, if everything else has gone pear-shaped. So, we've tried to talk, we argue, we fall back into the same pattern, and then it's like, and there's that conversation inside where you want to bring out the ultimate threat. Well, if you don't, I will, ... And instead you say, okay, I'm going to pull out the tool. Let's take 10 breaths together. And she will say yes. It's in our contract. She will say yes. And those first 3 or 4 breaths are sort of like, I'm not going to look him in the eyes, or I'm not going to show him I'm breathing. I'm not going to show her I'm breathing. I'm going to breathe imperceptibly. And then we encourage, come on, let's breathe this together. We're breathing together. So after 3 or 4 breaths, we're breathing together. By the 7th breath, we're beginning to see things completely differently. I'm looking at the humanity in this person's face. I'm understanding she's vulnerable. She's got a childhood. She was wounded. Whatever behavior I don't like that she's showing right now is probably because of a wound that she hasn't resolved. Gosh, do I want to be angry about that, or do I want to be compassionate? By the time I'm at the 10th breath, I just want to hug this incredible human being for having made it as far as she has. My goodness, what an amazing result. So I think that's a perfect example. And I think in 12 years of marriage, we've called upon this maybe 5 times. But it's never failed. And I've never known the breath to fail. The breath works. Maybe that's why it's called breathwork.
I wanted to touch on with breathwork. Has it ever felt uncomfortable or even confrontational? Or just has it ever sort of fought back, or have you ever had moments in your own practice where it's you've sort of felt there's been an uncomfortability with it?
With the breath?
Yeah.
Yeah, every breath work.
Really? Wow.
Every single one. I think yeah, honestly. Truthfully, I think and I see it in most breathers in a conscious connected breathwork session I'm talking about. Not with just a conscious breath. The conscious breath is always benign. I've never known it to be anything other than ointment for the wound or for the moment. The conscious connected breath, I think I don't mean to be dramatic when I say this, but I think most people go through a threshold of resistance. And I speak about this in my book, about the value of resistance. It's not a negative thing. It's a tool. It's like doubt. Doubt is not a negative thing. It's a tool that we can use. But I do go through resistance every time I breathe. It's like, oh my God, okay, this is work. And I thought I was going to kick back and take a moment, but now I've really got to, I've got to huff and puff now and do my work. And so there is a moment of a bit like if you were lifting weights. It's a hero's journey. Every one of these things has a beginning and a middle and an end, and you go into it with a will, and then after that first couple of flushes of yeah, I'm doing it, I've got this. And then comes that, oh boy, it's harder than I thought. And the demons show, the negativity, the resistance, and all the blockages show up. And so what I say to people who are breathing is just breathe and feel. That's where the alchemy lies, is when you breathe and feel. So feel the resistance. It's good practice. Feel the resistance, because then when the fear comes, or the anxiety, or the anger, or some of those more dominating feelings, more oppressive feelings, you'll be ready for them. You will have built your muscle. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it really does. Thank you so much. Have you ever sort of touching on sort of breath and psychedelics, and how conscious breathing can support or even replace plant medicine experiences? I think a lot of people nowadays are sort of diving into that. But
Yeah.
from your experience, do you feel the breath can completely replace those sorts of experiences?
Literally, no. Figuratively, yes. I think that what it can't replace is or what it doesn't usually replace is the sometimes overwhelming aspect of plant medicines and psychedelics. I've done a lot of work with the Psychedelic Society in England. I used to do breathworks for them many years ago, and ended up helping a lot of people who've had issues integrating after those experiences. So my use of the breath has been, probably half of it has been about helping people put things back together. How do because I think that the issue, what's different, I think, is that the data download that you get with the mind alterance is not really up to you. I mean, it is in terms of your subconscious and what it's meeting and what it's awakening and what it's stimulating, but the conscious mind can really be quite overwhelmed by it. It can be too much too quick. And I know even I did my ayahuasca journey back in the early 90s in Brazil. And I had a few months where I really explored it very deeply. And there are still things today that almost like I would call them tattoos, not scars, but indelible parts of the experience which have really they've taken some work to deal with. I wouldn't remove them like Mo Goddat's survey. They were traumatic. I wouldn't remove them, but I think it was probably the quickest descent into self-hatred occurred to me as a result of ayahuasca, and that took many years to integrate for me.
May I ask you to share your experience?
Yeah, well, you can never talk about these things. You need to talk from them, really. Otherwise, it's sort of a pub talk. But a quote that my brother said to me that is relevant to this, which is, why is it that we boast about things in the first half of our lives that we need to keep secret in the last half of our lives? So my youth was full of bravado. I was part of the not first wave of hippies. I was post 1964. I mean, I was only 10 years old in 1964. By about the end of the 68 to 70, I was already exploring LSD and ways of altering my consciousness, and I was spiritually very curious. And I loved women. I loved women because I had never really connected with my mother. So there was something underneath in my subconscious that was playing out. And I was kind of like, I wouldn't say a gigolo, but I was pretty indiscriminate and pretty, it was like, just give me another one. Was not, I was very active. and that was also, not to justify it, but that was also during the days when we were making love, not war. So there was a lot of that. You'd meet a pretty girl and you'd look at each other and go, let's go do it. And we'd go do it. So it wasn't like I wasn't a rapist or an abuser on in a legal sense. But in retrospect, I realized that actually, with the way I feel about sexuality today and the way I behaved at the time, I was there was a part of the feminine that I was really not able to respect. I was not able to see. I was not able. I just wanted my mother. I was like this scrambling little kid who was trying to reconnect, to find a connection with the feminine. But I didn't understand that at the time. When I was in my 30s, 40s, I didn't understand that. I went into self-blame and realized how I judged myself as disgraceful and distrustful and untrustworthy, and still the drive was there. So it was. It took me really till my 50s to understand my sexuality in a different way and to forgive myself for being a playboy. So that was what a lot of my self-disgust was about. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks so much for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope for those that are younger, I mean, I don't see it happening as much today, thank goodness. But I do think there's a lot that we need to learn about our sexuality before we exercise it. And it's curious because the marriage that I am in is one that was born of a 5-year friendship before we became lovers. And what it helped me really understand why in medieval times we had things like courtship and chaperones and completely the opposite of Tumblr or whatever the equivalent is today. That there was not this instant gratification. I suppose what I did is the equivalent of Tumblr today, of or Tinder or whatever it's called, where you swipe and pick. That it became so commodified and so superficial. But as a 50-year-old, I understood that when a woman, I don't want to be too graphic, but when a woman opens her legs, man is being invited into a realm that is so deep, so broad, and so full of things that he doesn't understand, that it needs to be done with utter humility and bring along a dose of grace too, because we've really lost the plot about what is really happening. And that leads me into the other reason that I hated myself, is because I wasn't good to my children. My first child I raised on my own from the age of 18. I was a single parent. Because of my closeness with him, the next 2 children I had, I wasn't close to. And I can't have those years back. And I wouldn't wish anybody to have to live with that. That's a weight that I don't even want to shed it. It's a weight that I need to live with. And I think without it, I wouldn't have discovered, as you'll read in my book, what happens after mastery. Because mastery ain't it. We think it is, but there's a lot that happens after mastery that we need to be thinking about and reflecting on, hopefully before we reach the mastery. And that's things like forgiveness and atonement and owning who we are, owning our shadow, owning the side of us, the underside, the underbelly of who we have been and what has driven us in life, rather than us sitting in the driver's seat ourselves.
Beautiful.
Thank you. It's really beautifully put, and I couldn't agree more that there isn't this sort of vulnerability shared with one another, and how important that is. Like, even if you think about education around sex in schools, it's never even mentioned that there's, vulnerability and there's invitation, and that you're holding,
Emotional exchange and
holding emotion, and what that looks like or feels like, the power of saying no, or how that can be, all of that. It's so important, and I can't express how grateful I am that you've shared that. So thank you.
Yeah. There was a famous quote made 2025 years ago, which was "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Right? And I think that's been really helpful for me to learn how to forgive myself, because that is part of the divine paradox, is that we're given all this equipment that we don't know how to use at a very young age. And it's like a 5-year-old being given a Ferrari. It's like, wow, it shines, it's red. I'm going to put my foot down and see what happens. And then all of a sudden we see the calamity that we can create as human beings. And that was certainly, and I remember at the time feeling quite self-righteous, like, it is about making love and not making war. But in those days, I didn't really understand what making love was. I mean, I got this thing, and I'm like, where's my breath? People. That's why I guess that's where the expression "dickhead" came from. It's like, where's my brain? For goodness sakes, what am I doing? Yet, this is potentially the most creative act that we can ever experience, partake in, and so I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by what I perceive to be, at least with the people I work with, the sense of responsibility and care that I see now, both in relationship and child raising. But I would love to see relationship in the school curriculum. I would love to see I'd love to see my book in the school curriculum. I keep getting
Breath,
feedback. Well, they need to read this in schools, because we're just not taught how to do these things. We're not taught about relationship. We're not taught about our sexuality. And what we see in the world today, in the digression of interests of sexuality and the double clicking on all these things that keep dividing it and making it more separate from who we are and the essence of what it's really all about, it just seems like we're going further and further away from the essence in many ways. And I guess at the same time, I'm really lucky because the people I work with are people who want to be conscious about it. So I feel hopeful that it makes me hopeful. See guys like you encouraging conversations like this. It's exactly what we need.
Thank you.
Anthony, thank you so much.
Where can people find more about you and your work, Anthony?
Alchemyofbreath.com is one option. My book is called Outer Chaos, Inner Calm, and it's on Amazon. And we have a community in Tuscany in Italy, and a community center there. And it's where people who study breathwork with me, we have a breathwork school. We have over 2,000 facilitators now out there in the world in many different countries. And they all come to this place in Italy. We call it Asha, Alchemy School of Healing Arts. So asha.global, you can come and join one of our breathwork retreats if you want to have an intense breathing experience, like a couple of breathworks a day for 5 to 7 days. And we also have trainings on land as well. We train facilitators on land, and we have online trainings for facilitators too. So come closer. We're happy to help. And for those who are interested in just to put a toe in the water, we have every Sunday an event called Breathe the World, which happens UK time at 9:30 and 5 p.m. And our staff facilitators come and do themed breathworks. We choose themes that are about self-development and growth. And you're welcome to come. They're half-hour breathworks. They're free. Probably 700 to 800 people every week come together and breathe. It's called Breathe the World. In the morning, we do from UK to Hawaii, and in the afternoon, we do from UK to Hawaii, LA and beyond.
Amazing.
Perfect.
Anthony, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.